So hi, Clive. Thank you for joining us from the UK today, even though you're normally based in Israel. So it's really a great pleasure to have you participate in our side event to the UN Water Conference in New York, Water Week. I was explaining how we got together thanks to Mira Olsen, who's a collaborator of the Peace Engineering Consortium, and how you very readily, and thank you again, agreed to speak today and share with the attendees a little bit about your experience working on the water issue across boundaries, and we'll be more than interested to hear how you're doing this with your colleague on the Palestinian side, Monther Hind, who will join us. But while we wait for Monther, and I'm going to message him myself as well, please introduce yourself, and if you want to share your screen, you're able to start explaining a little bit more about your work.
Okay, just one quick question, Frederick. How much time do I have to speak?
Okay, we have a full hour. So what I'd love is for you and Monther to speak individually for about 10-15 minutes. So then we can do a round of Q&A.
Okay, so that sounds great. So, oh, hang on, trying to find where my, there it is. Okay, so I've shared my screen and I will begin. Whoops, that's the end. I'm going to do that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you, Frederick, and all the other people that have been organizing this side event at the UN Water Conference. It's a real pleasure to be given the opportunity to discuss some of the work that I'm doing in the Jordan River Basin. And as Frederick said, Monther, my Palestinian colleague, will also be addressing us in this session. So I work for an NGO based in Israel called the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. And the Arava Institute is a Israeli environmental, academic, and research and development organization. But what we specifically focus on within that is the cross-border or transboundary environment issues that we share with our neighbors, most specifically our immediate neighbor, that being the Palestinians, but also slightly broader with Jordan, and of course, even maybe beyond those two neighbors. As you can see here, I serve as the director of the Center for Transboundary Water Management within the Institute, and a large focus of our work is the issue of how to effectively and cooperatively address many of the water issues that Israelis and Palestinians jointly face. Water, of course, in our region is a huge issue, given that we are in an arid region where water scarcity is a reality, and scarcity is only going to be exacerbated with respect to the climate crisis. So a lot of our work also helps us to build both adaptation and resilience towards climate change with respect to water resources management in arid regions. What I will be discussing specifically today is some of the work that we're doing that addresses what you see here in the title, wastewater management for communities that lack access to infrastructure. This is a huge problem in our region, and the lack of infrastructure results in the unplanned discharge of wastewater because there's a lack of sewer networks and wastewater treatment facilities. And this lack of infrastructure creates flow of wastewater from the Palestinian areas of the West Bank into Israel, And in essence, we have what is called, or what I call, a transboundary wastewater management issue. And one of the ways in which we're trying to address this issue, myself and my Palestinian partners, is through providing technologies and other solutions that can address these issues on site. You see there in my title, off-grid. Off-grid meaning, of course, the lack of access to infrastructure. We work very closely with the Palestinians, but also we do address some of these issues within Israel, specifically that being the Bedouin community. I don't think today I'll have time to talk about the Bedouin specifically, but maybe in the Q&A we can address some of those issues as well. So this is something that I assume most people on this webinar and others would intuitively understand, that water, of course, is not just water, because water underpins and is essential for everything. It's the foundation for health. It's essential for ecosystem functioning, economic development, security, and other services. And water also, especially in the transboundary context, has a political dimension that also needs to be effectively recognized and addressed. To dive right into our region, here are some numbers that just give you, for those that are unfamiliar with the Middle East, some appreciation of water scarcity. So we have numbers for Israel, Palestine, and Jordan here. And you can see that for all the countries, there is a gap between supply and demand. Those gaps are most problematic for Palestine and Jordan. For the Palestinians, the gap is roughly 400, twice as much as the amount of water that they have. And for Jordan, it's something like a gap of 500 million cubic meters of water per year. The gap is not so great in Israel, around 200 million cubic meters of water per year, but there still is a deficit there. Israel has closed the gap, or has narrowed the gap, let's say, between supply and demand, primarily through intensive investment in non-conventional water, and that is specifically with respect to desalination technology. Here is a map of the Jordan River system and the wider Israeli-Palestinian area. And what I want to illustrate here in this map is the extreme transboundary context with respect to watersheds that we share, Israelis and Palestinians. So firstly, just maybe to point out, the Jordan River system includes the Lake Kinneret, as you see here in the map, or as we would call the Sea of Galilee, the lower Jordan River, which terminates into the Dead Sea Basin. This is really the only significant source of surface water that we have access to. Israel, Jordan specifically, is quite dependent on these water resources. But the Jordan River Basin is a transboundary basin in that waters are contributed from the north, from Lebanon and Syria, and then we have Israel, Jordan, and Palestine also contributing percentages of their territories within the basin. More specifically, and adding to the complexity of transboundary water resources, we also have shared watersheds that originate upstream in the West Bank, and the West Bank in this map is delineated by what we call the green line. The green line is the 1949 armistice line that internationally separates the sovereign state of Israel from the occupied Palestinian territories. And you can see in these different polygons here a variety of watersheds that originate upstream on the West Bank, the territories of the West Bank, and mostly flow westwards, draining into the Mediterranean. The brown line is the extent of groundwater basins that are very, very important for both Israelis and Palestinians. And you can see that these groundwater resources are also transboundary, with a significant portion of the groundwater area for recharge lying within the territory of the West Bank. Now, the issue that I'm referring to specifically is this issue of wastewater. And what you can see here are different catchments within the territory of the West Bank. And those arrows demarcate the direction of flow. So there are a number of streams, micro catchments that originate in the West Bank, but are flowing towards the Mediterranean. Most of these catchments are seasonal catchments, meaning that they only have flow during our winter season as a result of flash flood events. Oftentimes the waters will infiltrate into the groundwater. Sometimes we also are dealing with problems of flooding due to high levels of flow and inadequate drainage infrastructure. The reality, though, is that due to the lack of treatment of wastewater in many areas within the West Bank, what contributes to the flow of these systems is not just the flash flood contribution from rainfall, but sewage that is either directly or indirectly drained into these watersheds. And then that sewage, like the fresh water, would flow from the West Bank across the border into Israel. This issue of cross-border sewage exacerbates tensions between Israelis and Palestinians with respect to water management issues that require a joint approach. And a lot of our work is trying to provide solutions to alleviating this issue. And that's really what I want to speak about today. This slide tries to sort of present to you some of the inequalities with respect to wastewater management, specifically within the territory of the West Bank. You can see here on the left-hand side the amount of sewage that is being generated from the Israeli settlements that have been established by the Israeli government in the occupied territories. And on the right, you can see the Palestinian cities and towns. Most important here is to look at the differences. If you look at the areas, the part of the flow diagram that's in red, you can see that on the Israeli settlement side, the total amount of sewage generated is estimated to be about 21 million cubic meters of water per year. Only around 12% of that sewage is not appropriately managed. On the Palestinian side, you can see a marked difference. Over 80% of the sewage coming out of the Palestinian areas, around 69 million cubic meters of water per year, is not being effectively dealt with. A large proportion of that sewage is being disposed into the, sorry, one second, move this. A large proportion of that sewage is being disposed into the environment, either indirectly through channeling that water into cesspits or directly discharging into streams. Now, why do we see such a marked difference here? One of the reasons is lack of access to infrastructure. One of the reasons why there's lack of access to infrastructure is the political context within how the West Bank is administered. Those areas administered under the Palestinian Authority versus those areas of the West Bank administered by what is called the Israel Civil Administration. Israeli community settlements within the West Bank are provided with infrastructure by the Israeli government, meaning that most of the sewage is being treated either within the West Bank or being pumped across the green line, that armistice line separating Israel from the occupied territories, and the wastewater is being treated in on the Israeli side. Whereas the infrastructure needed to address the sewage needs of the Palestinian population is unfortunately inadequate. And a big reason why we see these differences is infrastructure is the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the complexity, both politically, bureaucratically, and financially, to provide the needed infrastructure to service the needs of the Palestinian population in the West Bank. The outcome of all of this is, unfortunately, we are seeing a huge impact, a negative impact on the environment. And of course, there also is a huge impact to public health in terms of the exposure of the population to untreated or to partially treated sewage. One problem with the cesspits is that sewage can quite quickly infiltrate into the groundwater, which then leads to a contamination of drinking water for a resource that is very important for domestic consumption for Palestinians and Israelis alike. So the situation that we are focusing on here is this question of wastewater. And of course, this is very much part of the UN SDG 6 for clean water for all. And if we zoom out for a second beyond Israel-Palestine, what you can see here is only 46% of the world's population lacked safely managed sanitation in 2020. And most of these communities are off the grid. In other words, facing a similar reality to the Palestinians in not being effectively and adequately serviced with infrastructure. So this is a global issue that has to be addressed pretty much in most of the developing world. And what we are promoting in partnership, myself at the Arava Institute and the work that Monther and his colleagues do in his organization is decentralized wastewater treatment is one way to offer, as it's written here, an economical and environmental solution to off-grid communities, which can improve health and also promote global food security. Why are we talking about food security? Because what we're trying to achieve here is not just to treat the sewage, but to recycle the sewage to a high quality that can then be brought back into productive use in terms of irrigation. That's really important because many of the Palestinian communities that we are working with are rural or semi-rural, where a very important economic activity is agriculture. And due to our water scarcity, as you saw in the previous slide, most of what is driving that water scarcity is the lack of water for irrigation. So wastewater that is treated can be a huge opportunity to improving not just water security, but food security. So you can see here on the right, of course, there are the health hazards associated with unsafe sanitation, which of course we seek to address. And then the global water shortage, specifically in terms of agriculture, is another aspect of how we can address these issues with the on-site treatment and reuse of wastewater. So this is the global picture. Roughly, we're looking at about 1.3 billion people around the world that have limited access to water, sanitation, and electricity. Of course, off-grid is not only related to sanitation, but of course, drinking water, access to electricity through the grid, and so on. Many of these people are in a rural and semi-rural situation, as I just mentioned, for the Palestinian population. And the point that is written there at the third point, of course, is what is most important, because as it says there, until such communities have access to efficient water, energy, and sanitation service, little progress can be made to develop their economies and improve their lives. This is the situation in our region. Roughly 70%, as you saw in the previous slide, of the Palestinian population is off the grid. In Jordan, it's around 30%, and within Israel itself, specifically with respect to the Bedouin population, it's roughly 50%. So these are the populations that we are trying to target to introduce these decentralized approaches to help alleviate somewhat the lack of access to appropriate sanitation services. This is a map that illustrates some of these issues and also the complexity somewhat. So this is a map of one of the most important watersheds in our region. You can see there the black line denotes the hydrological border, but we also have these political borders that, of course, do not conform to the hydrological borders. And because of that mismatch between political borders and hydrological borders, you get a transboundary situation. The upstream of this watershed, which is called the Hebron watershed, is in the southern West Bank, and the most important city within the watershed is the city of Hebron and surrounding communities, which is roughly 1 million people. And all of those areas there that are highlighted or colored in purple are the Palestinian communities of the West Bank, and most of those communities are off the grid or are not being adequately serviced. So all the sewage generated upstream from those areas in purple, which are primarily Palestinian communities, are discharging their wastewater into the system. In Israel, you can see a mix of both on the grid and off the grid. So the areas in green are Israeli communities like the city of Beersheba that are actually very well serviced in terms of access to both sewer networks and wastewater treatment. But you can also see highlighted within the watershed on the Israeli side a number of Bedouin communities, some of which are provided with services. Those are the ones in yellow, and others, the ones in orange and also in red, are not adequately provided with service. So when we bring all of these communities together, you see here within one watershed, some of the population is connected, some of the population is not connected. The overall situation is because not everybody is connected, you are causing a large-scale environmental impact to the system. And at the end of the day, of course, any progress on hydrological rehabilitation of the watershed can only be done if everybody is provided with adequate service, and there is recognition on the transboundary complexity that the only way to do that is through bringing or bridging Israeli and Palestinian communities to find a way to do this in a bilateral or regional approach. This picture really illustrates the negative impacts of the lack of treatment. This is raw sewage flowing in the system, coming from industrial sites, primarily in the Hebron. So when we're talking about both the environmental and public health hazards, because this is a mix of both domestic, industrial, and agricultural sewage, there's great concern from a public health aspect in terms of, for example, heavy metals in the water. You can see here, of course, the impact to public health in the fact that you have a picture here of a Bedouin individual with his sheep and goats, and the potential epidemiological problem of those animals taking up some of these problematic hazardous chemicals that are in the sewage and then moving up the food pathway. So there is a direct connection, therefore, just as you saw illustrated in the picture, between exposure to sewage due to the lack of infrastructure and people's morbidity. For example, in Israel, diarrheal disease constitutes the leading cause of hospitalization in Bedouin infants because of the exposure to untreated sewage within those communities. Here you can see what it looks like in the Bedouin community. On the left is a cesspit, which is just covered with a piece of iron or aluminium, and on the right, you see raw sewage draining out of a building, and of course, you guys can pretty much make the connection between that and morbidity. Okay, so some of the ways in which we at the Institute are trying to find solutions to this issue is to introduce to communities a decentralized wastewater treatment and reuse technology. And the Institute, together with others, have introduced technology which is now actually being formally commercialized in a company called Laguna Innovation, which is a fully autonomous wastewater treatment plant that can operate on site and completely off the grid. You can see here all of the ways in which we're trying to achieve this, in that the system is energy self-sufficient through solar power. We have a novel design that removes sludge to almost zero, which of course reduces the maintenance costs. The treatment is a biological filter, meaning that it's a green technology, no chemicals are needed. The systems are designed to be modular and scalable, so they can grow per the client's needs in terms of how much wastewater needs to be treated at any one time. And the system is fully remote monitored in terms of operation, which minimizes the need for on-site personnel for supervision of the system. The systems can be very rapidly implemented, even in very problematic geographic locations, by bringing the system in on a truck and very quickly setting up and locating the system on site. A case study that I'll briefly mention is work that we are doing in the northern West Bank, which is one of the most important areas for olive oil production, and also an area that is being quite hard hit with respect to climate change on available rain, on precipitation patterns. So here is an example of one of the systems on site. It's a 25 cubic meter per day system. We are servicing a school of 300 students. So prior to our intervention, all of the sewage generated from the school was being drained into a cesspit. We are now treating that sewage on site and providing a good quality irrigation water to farmers neighboring the school. And that water is now being used to irrigate upwards of 300 olive trees. So again, what I'm trying to illustrate here is how important it is to completely rethink wastewater. It's not something that should be just discharged into the environment. It can be very productive so long as the treatment meets the quality needs, specifically, or in the case of the Palestinian context, the way in which that water can be productive for agriculture. And here you see another couple of pictures of the installation of the system. And this is where we bring it to the social economic benefits of the community. You can see there that we are able to increase the olive oil yields by upwards of 50%. And we estimate that that can provide additional revenue per farm per year of something like $5,000, which of course is a really, really important element to the socioeconomic context of introducing these types of decentralized systems. Sampling of the water is really important, and the Arava Institute engages with the community and also bring students to do the water quality monitoring. Monther does a lot of this work as well. I do want to just mention some challenges, and in this I will be ending my presentation. There's a lot of research now on what is called contaminants of emerging concern, and picking up things like antibiotics and herbicides in wastewater, and whether or not current wastewater treatment technology can remove these so-called emergent contaminants, and what are the risk factors to the potential uptake of these contaminants, both in the vegetation that is being irrigated, whether there's any potential risk to consumers, and also environmental risks in terms of groundwater and soil. This is a very active area of research, and we are engaging with researchers. In this case, this was a research done in partnership with the University of Maryland in the US. And finally, this is my last slide. You need to take a comprehensive approach to understanding the sustainability and scalability of decentralized wastewater. So what we focus on a lot, and we do this a lot also in partnership with our Palestinian colleagues, such as Monther, you need to have very strong relations with the community. The community must support what you're doing and be an active partner. The community should not be looked at as a beneficiary. The community must be an equal partner. You must engage with local and national government support, for example, the Ministry of Health, which in the case of Israel is the regulator for wastewater treatment and reuse. You need to build local governance institutions, what we call FEW utilities, which stands for food, energy, water. Capacity is essential, so operation and maintenance, monitoring, and extension services. And again, our technologies address some of these capacity needs. How do you turn this into a business initiative for long-term sustainability? So again, you saw some of the economic figures of how this can actually help to generate income once the water is put into irrigation. And finally, what we call beyond aid. We are very grateful for donor agencies such as the USAID to assist us, but they only help you to get your foot in the door. You really have to build long-term business models for commercial viability of these types of projects, and we're working now on addressing those issues as well. And with that, I'll end my presentation. Hopefully, Frederick, I was on time. If not, I apologize.
You were a little too long, but it was so interesting that I want to thank you. And I'm going to ask Monther to share his screen now and introduce his presentation. Before he does that, because we have our next panelist who is going to present for his colleague Ana Cristina Garcia Vasquez. Mark, if you can tell me if you can present in 25 minutes or so or later, that will help me with the overflow of wonderful information that was just shared by Clive. If you can unmute yourself and tell me now before Monther starts, that would be appreciated. If not, answer in the chat. If not, okay, I'm going to invite Monther to unmute and explain his project with the Palestinian Wastewater Engineers Group. And I really want to thank him for being available today. It is wonderful to have these presentations and to see Clive on the Israeli side and then Monther on the Palestinian side working alongside each other. Welcome, Monther. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Frederick, and thank you for having me. I hope you hear me well.
We do. You're a little far from the microphone. I don't know if you can get a little closer.
Yes, I'll do my best. Yes, thank you very much. So
okay.
It's better now?
It's a little better. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about an initiative which we made together with Clive, actually, on a project we implemented in the Jordan Valley in Palestine, focusing on the use of photovoltaic energy for groundwater pumping and treatment of gray wastewater and reuse in agriculture. It was an initiative funded by USAID, actually, and as I said, implemented in the Jordan Valley. So my talk will be about water, agriculture, and energy, influencing, of course, food security. Well, with regard to water, as you can see here, I'm showing a map which shows the reality of water resources in the West Bank, where Israel retains control over all resources, all groundwater resources in the West Bank, and it extracts almost all of them, 90% of the water from the aquifer, which are present underneath of the West Bank. Of course, Palestinians are neglected the access to the Jordan River, so high scarcity of water resources in Palestine. This is influencing the agriculture all over the country, especially in the Jordan Valley, where the Jordan Valley is quite important for the Palestinians because it makes 1/4 of the total area of the West Bank. And the area is a unique area with its climate, with its environment. It has the capacity of having a variety of crop patterns, where you can have citrus cultivated. It grows very well, banana, dates, and vegetables. Nowadays, agriculture in the Jordan Valley suffers lack of enough water resources and limited availability of energy. Well, according to World Bank statistics, the agriculture in Palestine contributes by about 100 million USD per year to the national GDP and provides a lot of jobs, around 20,000 jobs to the population. And it accounts for 60% of the vegetables that are produced in the West Bank and 100% of the dates harvested in Palestine. We have special dates called Mijul dates, a particular kind of date which is not cultivated all over the region, but in Israel, Palestine, worldwide, in California, and in Morocco. And in the Jordan Valley, dates are an important crop for Palestinians in general and for Palestinian farmers especially. Date trees are currently being planted in the Jordan Valley, mainly in Jericho area. There are about 18,000 dunums cultivated with medjool dates. With regard to energy, I shall say that the total energy consumption is small in the country. It's not an industrialized country, and let's say, which means that it is possible to have a significant impact with the development of solar energy projects. Most energy demand is imported from Jordan, a little amount from Jordan to the Jordan Valley, and mainly from Israel. The electricity system in the West Bank is not coherent. It is consisting of numerous isolated distribution systems that are not integrated into a distribution network. And the generation capacity and transmission network is quite limited as well. All of these things are pointing to quite consistent obstacles. On the water side, we have increased salinity of local groundwater, the aquifer, the shallow aquifer, referring to the Jordan Valley specifically, which limits the utilization of water for agricultural application. It is limiting the crop pattern. Vegetables are not tolerating the high salinity of water. So farmers are obliged to go for certain crops which are more tolerant to high salinity, like palm dates. So the water shortage due to climate change and political barriers is really influencing the life of the Palestinians. Farmers have to rely on shallow artesian well. In the Jordan Valley, we have two aquifers, a shallow aquifer, which is exploited by the Palestinians, but water is not enough to cope for their needs. And we have a deep aquifer where Palestinians are not allowed to use. It is completely partly used by the Israeli settlers in the Jordan Valley. So water is available in the Jordan Valley to a certain extent, but unfortunately, political constraints are not allowing Palestinian farmers to use it. In addition, let's say that this is leading to a limited potential for expanding the crop pattern, which is for sure affecting the food security. What are the challenges and what are the opportunities? Well, Palestine, as we saw, lacks conventional energy sources and imports almost its all energy needs. And in terms of renewable energy, talking about photovoltaic, I'm not talking about wind or other kind of renewable energy, but specifically about PV, photovoltaic, we produce just only a small amount, 1.4% of the overall installed energy capacity. And indeed, solar PV systems accounts for almost all of this capacity. What we are doing, how we are contributing to solve the problem and to do some of our efforts in order to mitigate such constraints. Well, part of our work is making some actions by our own and some other actions in partnership with some other Israeli organizations, like, for example, the Arava Institute for Environmental Study, where Clive is coming from. For example, we made a project called Green Technologies in Cooperative Date Farming. We implemented an innovative and sustainable solutions trying to meet the farmers' need on both sides. What we did an unconventional source. We did, let's say, an unconventional water treatment by treating gray wastewater and using it in agriculture. We used, let's say, collective wastewater treatment systems, gathering 3 to 5, 6, 7 households in one wastewater treatment plant, treating the wastewater and then reusing it in agriculture. And by doing this, we try to improve the health conditions of the population and to provide an extra source of water for irrigation. This is a photo, this is a picture. You can see, for example, to the right-hand side, an on-site wastewater treatment plant, which was under construction, a collective wastewater treatment plant treating wastewater for 7 families. And to the left-hand side, you can see the picture of the plant once completely constructed and in operation in the middle of the palm date trees, where treated wastewater is used for irrigation of palm dates. And at the same time, since there are difficulties and problems related to energy, we implemented 4 PV systems with a peak capacity of around 30 kilowatt peak. And this electricity produced, we used it for pumping water from the artesian well, trying to alleviate and reduce the cost and the burden on the farmers. So we provided the energy for the pumps, pumping water from the shallow aquifer, and also we provided the wastewater treatment plants, and where treated wastewater is used also for agriculture. Well, the sustainable technology, we try to use sustainable technology for wastewater treatment and for energy need. We used low-cost, low-tech wastewater treatment, and we used the simple photovoltaic systems connected to the grid. And so the solar energy is completely green, clean, and renewable. And residents of the Jordan Valley are benefiting now from the reduced wastewater pollution and reduction of ecological damage to the aquifers as a result of the installation of the treatment plants. Well, by this, we contribute to achieve food security by providing a new source of water and energy. And this was done by the Palestinian Wastewater Engineers Group and the Arava Institute over a project funded by the USAID, where Palestinian farmers as well as Israeli farmers could work together on these components and some other components, and discussing and dealing and trying to solve some other problems of common interest of both farmers. Thank you very much. This is all from me, Frederick.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm sure there are questions. I know I have one. And perhaps Clive can unmute and we can do a short panel with both of you. Could you tell us what you're working on together and how you met, since the theme of today is collaboration across boundaries? Right. If you can speak to how you met and what you're working on, I think that would be very interesting to the attendees.
Well, Frederick, this is a question to me or to Clive?
To both of you.
You go ahead. You go ahead, Monther. You start.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very kind of you. Well, let's say, yeah, it's a long story. Let's say, to make it short, we met over a site visit. Let's say we were competing for a project which was launched by the World Bank for the Red Dead Canal, which there was a plan by the Israeli and Jordanian government and the Palestinian Authority for the connection of the Red Sea with the Dead Sea, for different reasons, for desalination, for giving life back to the Dead Sea, and so on. I was an engineer. I am an engineer actually, but I was competing. We were in a joint venture, let's say, with a German company, shortlisted German company, and Clive and the Arava Institute, representing the Arava Institute, was with another French company, and we met over a long day of site visit. We discussed, we met, I liked what they are doing to the environment, their ideas and their proceedings. And slowly we got together and we started collaborating for the protection of the environment, for serving our both communities. This is, yes, maybe Clive would like to add something.
Well, thank you, Monther. That goes back, just so you know, I think we've been now collaborating for somewhat like, I think 15 or more years. And a lot of the work that we do is in the Jordan Valley, as Monther mentioned, working with communities there to help address their water, wastewater, and energy needs. We have a very good relationship that builds on each of our strengths. So as Monther said, he and his organization, he is a wastewater engineer. What Monther brings to the relationship is his expertise in engineering, but also with his real deep understanding of the Palestinian context and reality. And what we bring from the Arava Institute side is our understanding from the Israeli technology side, but also in terms of project management. And also because we are an academic organization, we're able to bring to the collaboration or broaden the collaboration because we're able to also bring students. And the Arava Institute brings to its campus Israeli students and Palestinian students. And so a lot of our projects and our partnership has benefited also by students that get to work on our projects and are also part of the cooperation in the way in which we work. The greywater facilities that Monther mentioned, the USAID project was a collaborative project where we were both funded by USAID to do some of this work. And our collaboration continues, and we both, I think, will agree, Monther, if you allow me, that we are mostly focused on doing real projects that are meaningful on the ground for the improvement of the quality of life of the people in the communities that we work together with.
So there's a question from Sherilyn, which you partly answered, Clive, but maybe you can take it live, about the water being desalinized by Israel from the Mediterranean Sea. And her question is, the concern is that all countries will want to do this, and it could lead to a situation, as this is her question, that is happening in Lake Mead in the US, which is to a dangerous low level, because we're basically overtaxing the Colorado River. So perhaps you both can speak to the plus and minus of the desalinization process.
Sure, Frederick. So I wrote there, I think, but for others that haven't seen. So desalination is an essential technology to addressing the needs for both Israel and Palestine and the other countries in the Middle East. However, like any technology, one needs to understand both the benefits and the costs of the technology. Israel is heavily dependent on desalination. Something like 70% of our domestic water supply is now produced from seawater desalination along the Mediterranean. The issues environmentally are twofold. The first one is the impact on the Mediterranean itself. It's not, I don't think you can make a comparison between the Mediterranean and Lake Mead. The Mediterranean is not going to run dry because we are desalinating from it. That's not going to happen. But what is of concern with respect to impacts on the Mediterranean or other coastal bodies that are being used for desalination is the return of the reject brine to the sea. So the outcome of the desalination process is a very high saline brine that is mostly returned to the sea as a discharge. Now, in the case of Israel, that discharge is heavily monitored to ensure that there are no long-term effects, but that doesn't mean to say that that there aren't worrying concerns, mostly in terms of the impact of the brine on localized aquatic systems. This could have an impact on fishing, for example, and it is something that has to be looked at, and it's something that needs to be looked at basin-wide If you look at a map of the Mediterranean, nearly every country around the Mediterranean, both northern Mediterranean countries and southern Mediterranean countries, are looking at desalination and are expanding desalination. From the Palestinian perspective, there is a lot of opportunities for large-scale desalination in Gaza, and maybe Monther can say a few words about that. And also that we do have agreements with Jordan to provide water to Jordan from desalination plants on the Mediterranean. Those kinds of water allocations or water transfers are governed by the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty of 1994. But I'll let Monther continue.
Well, thank you, Clive. Well, yes, indeed. Well, desalination, let's say I could talk a little bit about, for example, Gaza reality. But before, because they are going for desalination. They say, but before doing that, I think before going for desalination, consumption of big quantities of energy, we have to carefully examine the existing situation. Do we really have enough water for all? Do we have really enough water for our real needs? Are we over extracting water from the aquifers, overuse of water, higher consumption? Are we going, for example, for 300, 450 liters per capita per day, or we are fine with 100, 150 liters per day? Are we going for the proper crop pattern, which doesn't require high quantities of water? Then after that, if really we go for all of these things, then and we best calibrate them, then we go for desalination if there is no other solution. And Gaza, for example, in the strip of Gaza, there is high demand for water, and the aquifer is irreversibly damaged, completely polluted, very high salinity, nitrate concentration is beyond all limits of WHO. So they are forced to go for desalination. And this is the only solution which exists for them nowadays. If we talk about other countries, for example, the eastern side of Saudi Arabia, of Qatar, of Bahrain, they don't have enough water resources in certain areas, and the urban development and the industrial development is really pushing them for desalination. Luckily, in that area, they have enough. They have enough capacities to produce energy, but we have also to look for the consequences, for the pollution, for the brine. This is really beyond the control of all human beings.
Clive, anything you wanna add?
I'll just add the energy aspect. I consider that the biggest challenge to desalination, especially on such a large scale, is the fact that these facilities are heavily energy dependent, and you really cannot separate the energy issue from the water issue. So it's that nexus issue that has to be thought of. For example, in Israel, we are drawing energy for our desalination plants from the electric grid, but that electric grid is being powered almost exclusively by natural gas. So that's a problem, because what we're doing is for every cubic meter of water that we're producing, we're generating. I think that the comparison is every cubic meter equals almost 1 ton of CO2 into the atmosphere if the source of energy for desalination is still carbon-based fuel. So the energy aspect here is one that I think is essential. But that being said, desalination certainly is a very important part of the opportunities that we have to address water scarcity, specifically when access to coastlines is a possibility. So if we think about the Colorado drying up, where is Los Angeles going to go for water? If there's no longer water from the Colorado, well, it's going to eventually Los Angeles and other California coastal cities are going to, and they already are considering desalination. It's going to happen. It's guaranteed to happen.
And if I'm not mistaken, they're already starting that process linked to the Diablo Point nuclear plant because of the energy consumption that you mentioned. One of the logical ways to expend the energy efficiently is to use nuclear. Now, that carries other issues, but I just want to mention it as part of the nexus that is part of that desalination process. We still have a few minutes for questions. Please use the Q&A or the chat for questions. I'll ask one of both of you. So you've been working together for 15 years. Everyone knows the situation on the ground is what it is. What do you think needs to be done by your neighbors and potentially the international community to make sure that the cooperation that you've explained to us is happening, first of all, is maintained, but is also augmented? I know it's a big question.
Well, Frederick, if you allow me, Clive, let's say to say a few words about this. I think a few minutes are not enough to answer such a question. There's a lot to do actually. It's a difficult area where we live in, and there's a lot of political interferences. It's not that easy. To me, I think politics and politicians have to slow down and to be realistic and to look to real needs of their nations. For the time being, politicians are looking for their own needs, their own party needs. Unfortunately, many times they are looking for their own personal needs, trying to maneuver the whole nations to their own egoism and their own interest. And this is affecting heavily the relation between the nations, bringing to tension, bringing to a heightened situation, and bringing to a point of no return, no comprehension, and everybody is blaming the other part. Well, it needs the political stability, it needs the political support, it needs the political understanding. It needs a real partnership. It needs to slow down, to come down to the ground, and look to the eyes of each other and say, here we have to live, here we have to divide our resources in a fair way, and we have no other choice than doing that. Otherwise, we will be living in tension and not in a safe and stable condition. Well, in addition, we need also long-term education, and we need long-term public awareness, starting from schools, elementary schools, start to have a mutual common learning about the benefit of all nations of having a safe environment, safe water resources. It needs a cooperation between politicians, populations. Bylaws have to be established also by governments to strengthen these ideas and to make it applicable on the ground. And of course, we need also financial resources, and we need support. We need exchange of experience between who has the experience and who has not the experience, or who has this experience. We have to have trust in each other. And many other things, but I leave the floor to Clive.
Well, I'll just add very briefly to what Monther says. I think that in the case of our partnership and the work that we do, we're not waiting for the governments to ride in on a white horse and save the day, because just like what Monther said. So we are focused on getting what we can do with the realization and being realistic to how much civil society can actually do. For us, what's important are our partners. If we can improve the lives of our partners, even marginally, then I think we've done a good job. And when you're talking about, trying to move the process forward for long-term reconciliation, between Israelis and Palestinians, it really can't be done only by governments. You know, we have agreements with Jordan, we have agreements with Egypt, but we don't really have full integration between the Egyptian public and the Israeli public, or the Israeli public and the Jordanian public. That can only be done by people-to-people engagement, and it can only be done, if you allow me to be somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? If you allow me to basically say that, I think the work that myself and Monther are doing is really important, because what we're doing is doing that people-to-people engagement. And that's really the only way that we are going to reach a sustainable reconciliation in the region. But you have to be realistic that that takes time, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. And we've been doing it for 15 plus years. And I'm very proud of what I've done. I'm very proud of my relationship with Monther. And I can say that, again, you know, we've moved the needle somewhat, and we'll keep doing it. We'll keep engaging. We'll keep doing what we can do. There's certainly no thought at all of us giving up. And we are, at the end of the day, showing to the rest of the Israeli-Palestinian public and to our governments a new reality, a different way in which things can be done. And our work continues. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes because, as often happens with these online conferences, we had to shift the schedule a bit. The presentation from our colleague from Mexico, New Mexico, Ana Cristina, will be given by her colleague later. So we have a few minutes. If you are still available, both of you, there are two questions in the Q&A I'd like to submit to you. James Brooks is asking, are photovoltaics being used in small or medium scale desal? And are there examples of reuse of reject brine circular economy in at-scale projects?
So I'll take this briefly. The issue of solar and desal has been researched and looked at intensively throughout the world. The issue really is that when you're looking at large-scale desal, like what we're doing in Israel, and what is needed for Palestine and Gaza, solar energy on its own is simply not going to be efficient. The issue here is really how to scale up the electricity needs. To me, the best way to resolve that is to introduce into the grid as much solar as potentially as possible. And to offset, in the case of Israel, our heavy reliance on natural gas. Today in Israel, I think we are woefully behind targets to introduce renewables. The targets that we have set for ourselves and have committed to in the various COP processes is at least 30% renewables by 2030. We are only at 10%. So I think Israel has a long way to go to get to that 30%, and I think 30% is not ambitious. We should be going way beyond 30%. In terms of the other question, do you mind, Frederick, if I jump, because I've read the other question?
I was going to give it to you. I was going to give it to you, but let's hear from Monther.
Yeah, Monther, would you like to comment on solar?
Yes, on solar.
Yes, well, on solar, in our reality, let's say the two countries, let's say Palestine and Israel, are tiny countries. They are small countries. In our reality, for example, what I referred in my presentation to, in the Jordan Valley, what we are doing small to medium scale photovoltaic systems to offset the cost of energy, because energy supply is not always regular. The cost of energy is quite high. And what we are doing is that trying to help the farmers to have some reliable source of energy, reducing the cost to enable the farmer to continue having his pump in operation to extract water. And we are not solving completely the problem, but we are contributing to solve the problem. Well, if I mention, for example, in the northern part of the West Bank of Palestine, in Tubas and Jenin area, we are working on wind supply, on wind energy, which we hope to be beneficial, and we'll be making a lot of studies and research there. Well, in our case, also photovoltaic installed in the Jordan Valley, I shall say that it has also a constraint. It is because it's quite its temperature is quite high, it's quite hot, and the efficiency of the system is not to the best we would like to have. And also the footprint is quite high, taking quite large part of the land. So it's a solution, small solution, which has positives and negatives.
Go ahead, Clive, if you want to take Sherilyn's question, which I'll read. She references the possibility for Israel to reduce consumption of its water. I'm sure she's referencing the Kinneret. And what is the potential for a more equitable sharing of this resource?
Yeah, I think that's a really perceptive question, and also links to the desalination question. Israel began to desalinate back in 2005. And what that has meant is that Israel is gradually becoming less and less dependent on fresh water, both surface water from the Sea of Galilee. So, for example, prior to desalination, Israel was pumping out of the Sea of Galilee about 400 million cubic meters of water per year. Now, with the onset of desalination, Israel is pumping less than 100. The same goes for Israel's reliance on groundwater. So I think the opportunities that this reliance on desalination provides for more equitable water allocation of natural water resources, surface and groundwater, is something that needs to be looked at very seriously. I think a valid argument could be made that a groundwater resources should be there should be a discussion on how to reallocate greater Palestinian access to groundwater in the West Bank, because the reality is simple that Israel doesn't really need all of that groundwater as it once did. Now that might make sense, you know, from a purely scientific or engineering aspect, but when you raise that issue in a political context, well, then everything looks completely different, because there's a strong connection between water and sovereignty. So I don't envision that will be something that the Israeli government would simply do. Nevertheless, you can make a strong hydrological argument that Israel actually can do it without actually paying a negative consequence with respect to its long-term water sustainability. And if anything, it would help alleviate the water scarcity for Palestinians, and also help contribute to the political situation as well. But again, I'm only commenting on that as an academic, let's say. At the end of the day, it's going to have to be politicians that are going to come up with those kinds of agreements. But desalination certainly now has changed the hydrological reality that makes these kinds of water allocation decisions. At least one can consider them. Let's put it that way.
And if you allow, this is something that goes back a little bit. My first interest in the water issue stems from my studies of geopolitics 30 years ago. Shimon Peres, who was a great leader of Israel, spoke about water diplomacy and the water issue as a way to unlock ways to coexist peacefully between the peoples of the area. And he was talking about a grand vision, potentially including Turkey, that is undergoing extreme water stress at the moment. So this has been a long-standing vision. For complex reasons, it hasn't necessarily been articulated as ably as Shimon Peres did back then, but perhaps this will come back. In ending, because I'm going to let both of you go very soon, I'd like to hear, unless there are other questions coming in the Q&A or the chat, what is your hope for the immediate future? as you see the situation being what it is. You two are realists, you're engineers, you're on the ground. What gives you hope? Monther, you want to start?
Well, I would say, let's say, there's an Italian say which says, "La speranza è l'ultima a morire," which is hope is the last thing to die. Well, without hope, there is no life. There is not any minimum motivation. Let's say we have to keep hoping in a better situation, in a better political context, in a better cultural context also, in a better ideological context for the whole region. Let's say water doesn't know borders. You just mentioned Turkey and so on. There's quite enough water in Turkey for Turkey and the whole Middle East, perhaps 10 times more than our whole Middle East real need. And unfortunately, water is facing a lot of political borders. And this is it. It is politics, sovereignty, as Clive said just a few minutes ago. And we have to go ahead to lobby. We have to strengthen the public awareness. We have to do our best. We have to do our homework as to the best we can do, and ask the others to do their homework to the best they shall do.
I would just say very briefly, that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have hope. I wouldn't be getting up in the morning and doing the kind of work that I've been doing for the last 15 plus years and continue if I didn't think that there wasn't something to gain beyond me simply doing these projects as something of an academic interest. So, without hope, why would one do anything? And so that's why we do what we do.
Well, gentlemen, you give me hope, and I'm sure you're giving hope to the people joining us from many different countries. We have folks, I'm looking at the document I've asked everybody to share, calling in from everywhere. And this is a very key week because it is the first UN level water conference in almost 50 years. It is time to be serious about this transboundary cooperation. And the fact that both of you coming from neighboring countries, I know diplomatically the PA isn't recognized as a country, but we all know that it should. And I'm putting on my political hat here for just 1 second. It will happen. No one knows exactly the format it's going to take, but the fact that both of you are working alongside each other to solve issues that are central to life gives me hope. So I want to thank you again for being available to share your enthusiasm, your work with us today. And this is only the beginning of work that the Peace Innovation Institute, ClimateActionWorks, Arava, and Monther's organization are working on. We will make announcements in due course, as we say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frederick, for the opportunity. Monther, thank you. And thanks to all of those that